3 minutes only, and I will call you on the 3 minutes to lay out the trade-offs that you see. And just to be clear, Magatte is going to talk about Africa, Björn is going to talk about Europe and Germany. He's from Germany. And Gerard is going to talk about Doug's paper, but also the trade-offs in terms of supply chains. So without further ado, ladies first, Magatte, 3 minutes, kill them with your discussion here.
Well, he likes to talk about me in warrior terms, but I guess I am a warrior.
You are.
Yes. Anyway, so the trade-offs for Africa and the rest of the global south. For Africa, it's 1 to 2 million deaths that we know of for sure, just due to indoor air pollution. So the trade-off is, those amount of deaths. And we know that energy is actually key for economic growth. So if you take the energy away, we're not going to grow, we're not going to prosper. And what does it mean? People are going to leave the continent. I think you have a taste of that right now, with the migrant crisis. So expect to see a lot more of that. But for me, the most important thing here has to do with the trade-off is African dignity. Because poverty does not equal dignity. And I think for me that's the greatest of all trade-offs beyond even somebody's life. Because if you're going to be alive and not be able to stand on your own 2 feet, what is that life worth? And I think those trade-offs are definitely worth considering. And I won't even walk you into all the, I'm just going to leave it to that because it's pretty, to me, it's just a lot.
Okay, Björn, please.
Actually, I can take up this very well. We lost the sense of cheap energy 25 years ago, so we implemented a political strategy of systematically making energy consumption more expensive. And the purpose probably was to foster those called renewable energies and get a load on fossil fuels. But actually what we were doing, we were phasing out nuclear energy first. We were trying to change the energy system in a way that it's more environmentally friendly, less emissions, and even in the long run cheaper. So it's high investment cost up front, but then it pays off for itself so the solar and the sun and wind don't send a bill in energy. But now we're 25 years later, and about 500 billion or so later, we have the highest power cost in all of the world. I think Burkina Faso is more expensive, but we don't want to compare each other to. So
to be clear, you're saying Burkina Faso has higher power prices than Germany?
I believe, but it's the only country, and we might have topped that as well. The grid stability has been reduced drastically. We have 10 times higher carbon emissions in the power sector than France, for example. And we are ruining our forests for windmills. And it is, so I'm not an ecologist, but this is something that we should really keep in mind. So all in all, we're not a role model for the world, but an important model anyhow, because I believe more and more people understand that with weather-dependent energies as a primary form, you end up in lots of challenges that are extremely hard and difficult and expensive to solve. So we are actually a model. My favorite Twitter hashtag is peak renewables.
I like this idea, believe me. One more note, I'm going to introduce Gerard Holland and let him speak in just a minute, but Gerard is sitting in for Doug Stokes, who wrote an excellent paper on supply chains. Doug is gutted that he could not be here. He took very sick with the flu. So Doug very much wanted to be here, but Gerard has read his paper, edited his paper, and is very conversant in these ideas around supply chain. So Gerard, brief us on Doug's paper and how the alt energy push has made us vulnerable in the West.
Yeah, absolutely. I think fundamentally when we set out for our ARC research, and again, another plug, would encourage you all to grab your copies out on the desk, but really to understand human flourishing, have to understand power and electricity and how that drives and really gets to the heart of our societies, and it might be taken for granted for a lot in this room, but that is not the understanding when you sort of get out there in culture. So fundamentally, the question that we wanted to ask is, how do you produce energy as cheap as possible, resilient, reliable, and secure as possible, whilst maintaining the fundamental responsibility to steward the natural environment? And particularly on that security point, I think we've all been shocked by, the incredible asset inflation and economic destabilization really since the Russian incursion into the Ukraine. To put that into perspective, if you take OPEC, 40 of the world's sort of largest oil-producing nations, you're including the Saudis in there, you're including the Russians, that only makes up 40% of the world's crude oil production. If you look at the Europe space, only 30% of Europe's oil and gas actually comes from Russia. So just from that small percentage, that third, we've had this enormous turmoil globally. When you look at the critical minerals, in particular the rare earths that are building the solar panels, that are building the wind turbines, that are key components in the EVs, key components in all of our batteries, you're looking at almost a total strategic and logistical monopoly upon China. Particularly in the rare earth space, we're looking at 90% of refinery capacity exclusively within China, and then about 60% of the mining and the supply of that as well. This isn't the market doing what the market does. This is statecraft and grand strategy played out across 20 or 30 years. Deng Xiaoping made this quite clear in the 90s that he could see the future was heading in this direction to secure the critical minerals and use that to leverage soft power, particularly in the global marketplace. And just in 2021, 3 of those rare earth companies were consolidated into one state-owned Chinese company, which now produces 70% of China's rare earths. So we're essentially seeing that all of the world's rare earths, 90%, comes from one state-owned Chinese company. Now, you don't have to be in a hot war conflict with China for that to be an issue, and in fact, we would want to avoid that at all costs possible. But as we've seen as an Australian in recent times, particularly around the sort of COVID issue, Australia asked for an inquiry into the origin of COVID-19, maybe weren't satisfied with the argument that it came from a pangolin or a bat. We saw that economic warfare play out with an instant blockage on all of our beef, on all of our red wine. This is a live issue that's happening right now. The US has also seen some of this going back and forth, particularly with some critical minerals, gallium, germanium. There's already been tariffs and blocks and back and forth on that. And of course, the graphite, which is happening just, I think as we speak, about a month ago, and trade embargoes on graphite as well. So, I mean, fundamentally, I am for human flourishing. If we are for human flourishing, we have to be about securing our energy systems and making sure that we're building a system that is resilient enough in order to protect, secure, and innovate and just provide abundance for our communities, and that can't be dependent, no matter who it is, no matter what nation, on one provider.
Great points, and if I can just add to Doug's paper, he talked about high-strength magnets. The term of art is neodymium iron boron magnets. These are high coercivity is the term of art for why we use these magnets. They're critical components in electric vehicles and wind turbines. China controls 90% of the global market in neodymium iron boron magnets. They control 100% of the global market in terbium and dysprosium, which are the rare earth elements that are needed to dope those magnets to make them function better at high temperature. So I'll just make one other quick point, because I know you're conversant with Doug's paper, but I read it, it's really important. The US Department of Commerce issued a report about a year and a half ago, and I wrote about this on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. This report that the Department of Commerce wrote, half of it was redacted because of national security reasons. The US government recognizes the defense vulnerability that it has to China and Chinese supply chains around these neodymium iron boron magnets and rare earths in general. They are critical components in fighter jets, in missiles, in guidance systems, and yet, and this is the part that I simply do not understand, why the West, why in the name of Peter, Paul, and Mary, would we make ourselves now dependent on China when China is not our friend? I'm not a China basher, but China is looking out after China. So my quick comments there. Magatte, we recorded a podcast with our friends Scott Tinker and Chris Wright this morning to talk about the importance of energy and power to women and girls. And we talked at length about indoor air pollution. It seems to me this is another trade-off that Africa is facing. It's the health of half of its population because they're using lousy fuels, wood, biomass, dung, wheat straw. Talk about that if you don't mind.
I mean, I don't know if maybe he talked about it earlier, but yeah, so look, when you have to think about what poverty energy looks and is, what about who here has to take 45 minutes before they can, between the moment you decide to take a shower and the moment you actually take a shower? And I'm not talking about the procrastinators in here. I'm just talking about, think about you're in front of your shower and before the water can come on your body, 45 minutes goes by. Who here has to go through that? I grew up like that. Because you too?
Yes.
Well, you because probably some, but I'm still
Magatte
in
is,
it.
Magatte is from Senegal, by the way.
Yes, I'm from Senegal. So because shower time means grandma has to get the coal going into the little stove outside. She's over there fanning it, you know, until it catches on. Then she puts a pot of water on top of it. And then when it boils, then she puts it in a bucket, in a bigger bucket, adds cold water to it, and then somebody drags that to the shower area. And there finally, at last, 45 minutes later, I can take my shower. So that's what shower time is for me, right? And then during the cold times, yes, we have cold weather in Africa, for those of you who don't know. It's kind of chilly at night. We don't have heaters like most people do. So what does grandma do again? She'll take a little ceramic type of pot, you know, almost like a vase size, and then she'll put the coals in it, get it going, and so when it's completely red hot, then she puts little incense in it, and then she takes it back inside the house. Well, what does it mean? It means that some of my cousins are probably going to die, you know, because when you're asthmatic, but this is the only way you can keep heat in the home, what do you do with that, right? And it's just like that about everything. It's our time, it's not only the time, but it's also our health. And it's just, when you think we're in the 21st century, and this is how so many more people live, and then you're going to turn around and tell me, oh, you Africans have low IQ, that's why you can't produce anything. I promise you, any one of you who would have to live like that day in and day out, do you really have the time to be thinking about more than just where you're going to get that wood from, or how you're going to keep yourself warm, or anything like that? So let's stop the cheating here, and let's be real.
Björn, you said that this move in Germany started 25 years ago. Why 25 years ago? And is the power of the Green Party declining in Germany? You lost two big elections, or there were two big elections in Bavaria and Hesse just recently. Talk about those, please. 25 years first. Why 25 years ago?
I mean, we had a great respect for stable energy system all the time. And actually, it's a very long history. It goes back to Martin Heidegger, and it is external forces trying to convince the German public to destroy itself. So it was from the GDR, so from the communist side, and in parts probably from the CIA as well, that tried to prevent us from doing mining, from doing the slogan from the communist side was taking over. They wanted to take over without reaching us. And they did it by successfully destroying our chemical industry and our nuclear industry. And they achieved it by fear, by measures of fear. And that is a very typical propaganda thing. So that's the past. And it was getting successful in 1998 when a socialist green government took over. And unfortunately, all political parties have maintained this policy until now, and only now there's the backswing from the conservative liberal side to correct those policies, but they are very timid, and we have essentially a majority of close to 70% of the people in the popular vote in favor of nuclear energy nowadays. But it will take a few years until this
Well, so let me stop you there, because you remember in April, I mean, Germany already had your backs to the wall. You don't have Russian gas, and yet in April you closed your last nuclear plants.
Nobody understands.
Help me understand this, because I cannot get. I don't get it. I'm not. Why would you do that?
There is no reason. There is no practical reason, but in particular, the people from the green side very often tend not to listen to arguments from natural sciences. Let's put it very cautiously.
So it's emotion in the German politics that's driving the policy.
It's ideology.
In a country that's very technocratic.
Apparently they don't care very much about climate change because that's obviously, so it's by your deeds you should be judged and not by your words. So that's it. We are in a mess, and how we get out. I think this conference should be about how we get out of this mess and what type of strategies we should develop to replace this ideology of the Energiewende. It has a very strong emotional character, but you don't stop such an ideology by fighting it. You stop it by replacing it by something better. And I think we should focus the discussion. So I've talked since 10 years about this energy policy. I'm bored. It's not really interesting because it was so clear that it had to happen. And only now we had those very strong cost increases starting 21 before the Russian crisis or the Ukrainian crisis.
Right.
But it's now getting into everybody's mind. And the time is ripe for developing something better and something new, and that is, I believe, the topic of this conference.
Yeah, completely agree. Well,
Can I push back on that?
Yes, of course. Briefly, we're running out of time.
Yeah, no, I know, but when you're saying we have to develop better technologies, I think people are already working better technologies. I think the bigger problem right now is you have a big subset, or at least very loud subset of a population that's not willing to hear, and they have really real consequences. Your country is there because of people who speak like that and think that way. So I think the time has really come for us to try and hold their feet up to the fire. I feel like we've been fighting this the wrong way. We've been trying to fight this with rationality where there is no rationality responding in front. So they have been leading the way with emotions. We can lead with greater emotion, because I have yet to see someone who's telling me, I believe the earth is going to go to hell in 12 years, and yet tell me, if I say, okay, let's say it's going to go to hell in 12 years. We have 1 to 2 million women in Africa. These are among the most vulnerable of us, who are dying every single year. World is going to hell in 12 years. You're saying we stop everything now. So multiply 1 to 2, multiply by 12. You're telling me that you're okay with 12 to 24 million African women dying right now so that we can supposedly avoid that. Do you want to sign your name at the bottom? If you do,
Amen, sister.
Tell me. And if you don't, then it means we have to rethink our energy mix. I have yet to find a person who says, sign me up. So there goes the fight.
So let's briefly conclude, because we need, I believe in the better story. But I also am very clear-eyed about the need for sober analysis before optimism. So Doug Stokes in his paper makes the point that we have to reinvigorate new industry in the West on the rare earths, on magnets, on mining, on refining, all of these things. So Gerard, can you briefly summarize what Doug was talking about there, and what is the way forward that's optimistic in this?
Well, I think that the optimism has to come from a sense of civilizational confidence and a return to actually advocating for common sense in these spaces. I mean, I look at some of the amazing work that actually has been happening in Australia recently off the back of Menzies. I know the IPA have been doing some great stuff, YSI, and the leadership of Peter Dutton and Ted O'Brien in saying, okay, we need nuclear here. And that is an amazing future technology that we should be investing in and moving towards. But again, when we talk about the sober analysis, I'm looking at the numbers of that. It's still currently illegal in Australia, and this side of politics isn't in government.
Nuclear energy is still illegal in Australia.
Yeah. So that's still another 2 or 3 years off, assuming they win the next election before they can even legislate for that. Then you've got to start building them, which is another, 10 to 14 years. That brings us to like 2038, 2039. If we're decommissioning our coal now, what are we going to do for the next 15, 20 years? And so this is where the confidence has to come now, that we know these things. What happens now is we have to feel empowered and feel confident to start advocating for this and saying we should not be turning anything off until we're ready to turn something else on.
Amen,
and we are
brother.
not ready to turn on the technologies that we've been
I'll
transitioning
clap for
to
that one
currently.
right there. Absolutely. Bjorn, briefly, how does Germany pull itself out of the ditch? Can it pull itself out of the ditch? What are the next steps? Should we turn on those nuclear reactors right now, the ones that were closed?
It will be difficult, but it has to be done. But we need to set our mind on the true tasks, and that is to provide prosperity to 8 billion people and not only just to us. So we need to fight the degrowth ideology, so which is an ideology that comes out of scarcity and not out of plenty. And we need to identify or define a technology roadmap based on only 3 principles. So everything we foster and we develop in the private sector or in the government sector has to be compact, so not using much space and resources. It has to be circular, not producing much waste, and it has to be cheap, because every technology that is better than status quo, and in particular as coal and dung and so the even worse things, they have to be, so as soon as they are cheaper than the status quo, they will get into the market, penetrate the market just by Adam Smith and nothing else, no government policies required. And this is something we really need to work on. We need ecological realism, and we need to set our mind to more productive and forward-looking strategies.
Great, thank you. Magatte, briefly. Hey, they're telling me to stop here, so don't look at me. I know we have more than we can fit into our panel.
That's okay. So while Bjorn works on what he works on, I'm going to keep on the crusade of really holding their feet up to the fire, knowing that when push comes to shove, none of them has anything to say, and it's actually forcing people to take a step back and rethink. So while you work on all the technology part, we are going to work on. I'm not ashamed of causing shame in the name of good. So they have to know what's going on, and this can't go on. So I'll keep crusading. You keep doing the technology part.
I think this.
And I also say, leave us alone. The West can do, you can go into whatever suicidal path you are putting yourself on, but don't come and tell me what to do with my energy, my resources, and I don't care about your $100 billion of so-called climate aid when you're giving me $100 billion in aid, asking me to sit on $12 trillion worth of oil and gas that's sitting under my soil. That is not a deal.
And actually, where it fits very well together, so in our company, we're developing the nuclear technology that might feed the African growth. And that is where I'm very happy to have met Magatte. So we will keep on working on this together.
Good.
Pleasure.
Well, I'm going to conclude here, but before I do, since I have the chair, I'm going to express my own personal privilege. My wife, Lauren, is here. My beautiful, talented wife, Lauren, is here. And 41 years ago today, we had our first date.
Congratulations.
So she's out there somewhere. She's the mother of our 3 beautiful children. So if Tinker can take a picture of all y'all, I can acknowledge my wife and our first date. So I'll end with my favorite line, which is energy realism is energy humanism. Energy realism is energy humanism, and we need more of both. And if there's one thing, Jordan asked us yesterday, what is it that you hope for? Well, I hope that art can help ignite this backlash against the crazy town policies that are being pushed by these climate NGOs. We have to embrace a vision of affordable, abundant, reliable energy for everyone on the planet. That's my hope. Thank you all.